Welcome to Truth Behind Travel Podcast, a platform for tourism, travel, and hospitality professionals and enthusiasts to share, learn, and unlearn what we need to create better tourism, protect the environment, and become better humans. I'm your host, Dolores Semeraro, and every week I bring on the podcast the voices of those out there making a difference to learn the hard truth behind the world of travel and tourism, what works and what we can collectively do better. Welcome to Truth Behind Travel 2026. New year, new season. We're dedicating it to exploring and discussing how people travel, why, and how we can read between the lines to understand the bigger travel picture. Welcome to a very special episode of Truth Behind Travel podcast. After the success of season 4, all the guest speakers that I've hosted on the podcast have gathered for a very special virtual session in collaboration with the Institute of Tourism and its president, Reza Soldani. During the virtual session, which was live on instituteoftourism.com and its YouTube channel, all the guest speakers of season 4 shared insights, value, and wisdom across 4 specific segments. Travel media and impact with Carmen Roberts and Lola Akinmade, regenerative tourism with Tina O'Dwyer, Sonia Gotobel, and Jong, community tourism and support, Sarah Payne, Jennine Cohen, and Gallagher, and innovation and inclusion with Iris Serbonescu, Vanessa Karell, and Katerina Varao. Many of these names are very familiar to you. You may find the interviews of each one of them on the podcast during season 4. And during today's episode, I'm resharing with you the content of the virtual roundtable that was live on instituteoftourism.com. Each segment has specific questions for leading speakers, which I will introduce time by time. And I leave it on to you to enjoy the wisdom, the wealth of knowledge and experience that the speakers have shared during the roundtable. Let's start with travel media and impact with Carmen Roberts and Lola Akinmade. Should destination storytelling be treated as a strategic national asset? And if so, how can governments ensure that media narratives reflect authenticity rather than over-commercialization? Let's hear it from Lola.
From my perspective, absolutely. It can be treated as a strategic asset because that's what shapes the global perception of a destination, right? Which in turn translates into revenue, but with a caveat, right? Transparency and authenticity, because we are living in very challenging times right now where there's a battle for control of narratives and increasing kind of lack of transparency across the board when it comes to truth telling. So for destinations to be able to say, we're going to tell our own story, they're going to have to do it in a less gimmicky, authentic way. Because nowadays, gimmick denotes distraction. Long are the days where we could just have gimmicky campaigns, but now when somebody is doing something gimmicky, then we're saying, what are they distracting us from? What do you think, Carmen?
I totally agree. And I think, this is such an important question. And of course, it would be in an ideal world, strategic storytelling is a strategic national asset, but it's easier said than done, isn't it? And you've got a lot of elements at play. But I think what is key to this is authenticity, but also include the local voices in your storytelling, and also the gatekeepers, the governments, the PR people, those people getting people to tell their stories, the journalists, the content creators. You've got to be careful on who you choose. You've got to be representative, but you've also got to make sure that this is the correct voice for your brand. And I can't help but think about Japan. I lived in Japan for 8 years, and I've seen the whole cycle of when I first went to Japan in 2005, they were so desperate for tourists. And then when I moved there in 2014, and I was there till 2022, I saw the slow evolution of how Japan became more accessible, more popular amongst international tourists. And then I know this sounds cliched, but it's the ultimate culture clash. You know, Japan is a very considered, polite culture. And then when you have mass tourism coming in, there's all sorts of clashing happening. And then a prime example is the Kyoto Cherry Blossom Festival this year has had to be cancelled because mass tourists, all these tourists that are coming in are being disrespectful. And the locals in Japan have decided that we're going to have to close this very popular cherry blossom festival. So that's a real shame.
No, I was just going to say, and that's what, happens when we focus on kind of exposure campaigns over, long-term impact storytelling, right? Where we're not focusing on just identity, heritage, values and saying, what's the latest trend? What can we up on to stay relevant? And that's what kind of causes this kind of mumbled, unclear messaging from a destination, because to stay relevant, I have to do something that makes me memorable, which can also be the antithesis, right, of what you're trying to do, which is showcase yourself authentically.
So how can public institutions collaborate with travel media to promote lesser-known regions without triggering that unsustainable growth? Over to Carmen.
Again, it's a really challenging topic, and I think this is a real delicate balance that you have to strike. But again, I come back to having the authentic local voices that are helping tell this narrative. You've got to make the link with the journalists, the institutions, the tour operators that are bringing tourists in and telling the story. You've got to have that connection with local people who live there, who are really impacted by this business. And it goes back to them also benefiting financially from tourism. It's sort of a holistic approach, if that makes sense. And I think that is really, really key, that you've got local people involved in this conversation.
Absolutely. And I agree. And I think, there are two ways of telling stories. There is, this is who I am. And then there is, this is why you need to come visit me. The first one says, this is who I am. Accept me as I am. If it connects, you're more than welcome to visit me. And that comes with some kind of reverence versus, this is why you should come see me, right? And there are many ways, destinations can kind of focus from these kind of just exposure-driven, marketing to more impact. It could be investing in seasonal storytelling, emphasizing your culture, analyzing visitor stats, and then just tapping into other demographics. And I'll give you an example from my own backyard here in Stockholm. So last year, I launched a kind of expanded literary tourism in the city. We've got the Stieg Larsson Millennial Trilogy. We've got Astrid Lindgren. And last year, we launched the Stockholm Book Club Tour, right? Partnering with a woman-led experience company, bringing book clubs to explore the city from a different angle, focusing on culture, history, and above all, community, right? And so what we're doing in that way was adding another layer of storytelling to Stockholm beyond fika, or cinnamon buns, by people that are truly invested. And so those are kind of ways by just not just going back to the things that have been promoted to death, but saying, what are other demographics? What do they truly value? Because if they value that with reverence, then they're going to come do it with reverence in your destination, right? And so those are just some examples of ways where governments can do that in terms of partnering, but also investing in independent tourism and journalism and independent reporting. Because if I say my values, these are my values, then I'm not going to be scared if an international documentary comes to create something in my backyard because my values match what I'm saying publicly. So those are things like destinations have to think about as well.
How can governments ensure that AI-driven travel discovery and travel prompts and recommendations does not marginalize smaller destinations or even culturally sensitive communities?
To add some framework, whether we like it or not, AI is here to stay. Now, how we show up and interact with it is what's most important. How can we, in this new ecosystem, ensure that our values, our traditions, the things that we find important are part of this ecosystem moving forward? And with every transition in media, like the media landscape, there will always be pushback, right? So where there's going to be growing pains, there's going to be legitimate concerns, but it's going to happen. That revolution or the evolution is going to happen whether we like it or not. And it takes me back to the days when, the travel journalists were mad about travel bloggers, and then travel bloggers were mad about travel influencers, and then photographers were mad about Instagram photographers, right? It's an evolution. Now, this means because it's here to stay, how can we make sure that what's important to us, our values, are part of that content generation? How can we make sure that the lesser known destinations are making sure their content, their voices are put in there and we don't introduce bias? And so from my own end, I think that's when governments have to look at AI as advocates, as an advocacy issue. How can I advocate to make sure that what I find important to me is in that system because I'm not left behind when we evolve? So I just wanted to kind of throw that eye level in there.
I totally agree. I think AI is here to stay, and it's how we use it and how we harness it that's really going to matter. And I've seen a lot of destinations and tourist boards using AI on their front-facing customers' websites. So if you type in something, for instance, some American websites have been using this in the lead up to the World Cup, answering basic questions from their own internal AI that is answering FAQs, I guess, and into a degree. So that is one way that governments can control that AI narrative. But what I would hope that I would see, we might be seeing a bit of a backlash amongst discerning tourists and travelers who want to seek out the authenticity, who can see AI for what it is, and then also use that as a starting point, but not the be all and end all. So then you use that as your starting point, and then you seek out the local stories, the authenticity, and go beyond the surface level content.
Thank you, Carmen. We have inputs from Anne. Over to you.
So I think a lot of destinations forget that if the storytelling kind of runs ahead of their practices, or they don't really present what's actual true, like not connected to the local community or not really focused on responsible tourism, that it can actually become a liability. So, for example, I live in Bali, and we all know how Bali is presented worldwide. And there's definitely a beautiful side of Bali, which is over commercialized. And there are a lot of glossy campaigns. But when travelers actually visit Bali, they're sometimes or often disappointed because there's also obviously a downside of Bali: heavy traffic, construction, and all the other things that you don't see on social media. And if it becomes a liability like this, it makes people lose trust. There's so many people saying, I don't want to go to Bali, Bali is ruined. But if you actually know where to find the right places, it's still a beautiful island. And I think trust is really hard to rebuild than it is to lose. So I think destinations should definitely keep in mind that storytelling becomes a liability, so you have to treat it very carefully.
Thank you, Carmen Roberts and Lola Akinmade, for contributing to the first segment of the Roundtable dedicated to travel media and impact. Now, over to the second segment dedicated to regenerative tourism. Our speakers for the segment are Tina O'Dwyer, the founder of the Tourism Space, Anne de Jong, co-founder of the Good Tourism Institute, and Sonia Godlebe from Madagascar, pioneer of tourism in Madagascar and sustainable tourism advocate. Thank you for being here. And the first question is, how do we measure regeneration in concrete terms? And which new indicators should replace the most traditional KPIs like arrivals and occupancy? We start with Tina O'Dwyer. Over to you.
I don't think we can replace the traditional indicators. We're probably seeking, because we are where we are, we're not going to replace what has defined the tourism industry forever, which is, as you say, arrivals and occupancy. I think in tourism, we're selling people and places, ultimately, but we don't have a metric to match those. Arrivals is like people crossing borders, crossing ports, crossing airports. Occupancy is a business indicator, but it's not rocket science to think what we might measure for people and place vitality, for example. So we could mention for people, host sentiment, local business, confidence, ecological values locally, quality of jobs locally, percentage of youth people staying locally in their environment. Really, we're trying. So they're all, I'm naming those as numerical metrics because we're quite caught in tourism in numerical metrics. But really, we're looking at proxies for how healthy and vibrant a place where tourism takes place really is. And numbers are not an indication of that. And I'll share just a tiny short story because I was with a group yesterday who are based in one of Ireland's most visited and most successful destinations in terms of metrics. And they were discussing a regenerative course by us has been commissioned by a local tourism or sporting organisation. And they said that their measure of success for tourism in their area, they've high footfall, is the number of children enrolled in the primary schools, because that is an indicator for the number of members that will be in their club for their sporting and how successful they can be. And it's a traditional Irish sport. So I thought it's blindingly simple. It's a metric we can measure, and it's a really good indicator of how resilient and healthy a place is. So there's just a few we could use.
Thank you, Tina. And now the inputs from Sonia.
It is very much a question of perspective of northern or southern hemisphere of where tourism takes place, right? Because regenerative tourism I would be really, I use very carefully this definition, but if you are practicing tourism in poor developing countries, this concept is not even existing. So it's even an unknown buzzword. We just talk about tourism. We hope to have tourists from time to time, and so the metrics are really the most basic metrics like GDP and how many jobs are generated, how much food it gives for how many people. So and also the donors, we very much rely on donors, on institutions. They push us to use these metrics as well, because that's how they measure the tourism in this type of countries, in this type of destinations, unfortunately. So, but I totally agree that we should we really need other KPIs, and we do not live for rating, right? So I think tourism in any concept should the most important KPI is the residents' perception in tourism. So it's even a concept that has been formalized in French Polynesia. So this type of, I will not go into detail, but there are many informations on the Tahiti website. So the perception of tourism is the priority and is the key to success.
Thank you, Sonia. And over to Anne.
For example, in Madagascar, they don't know regenerative tourism, but they know tourism and they want to do it well for their destination. And I do feel that I sometimes have issues with companies or travel businesses going into the regenerative movement, seeing it as the next big thing. But basically how I see it, it's kind of the same practices, but just wrapped in different terminology. So we all want locals to directly benefit and thrive from tourism. We want nature and wildlife to be protected and restored. We want travelers to contribute positively, to have businesses profit from positive impact. So I do think that new terminology can help generate momentum. And I do see there's a lot of excitement again about doing the right thing. I think people kind of got bored about the term of sustainability. But yeah, I think what truly sets destinations apart is not the wording, but it's really action, accountability, and measurable results. And then what you say about the KPIs. So I also work with Green Destinations certification scheme, and what we focus on there, and actually see a lot of destinations doing this really well, is measuring the tourism revenue staying in the destination. So actually measuring leakage. So really focusing on what is actually benefiting the local economy. Also, and I think Sonia mentioned that as well, is the resident satisfaction score. So how do locals feel about tourism, and to actually measure that consistently and kind of keep track of how they feel about receiving travelers. And also what we look at, this is a project I'm doing in Indonesia, is more about travel behavior. So how can you ensure that travelers adapt their behavior in a way that it contributes to good tourism? And you can also measure that. So where do travelers stay? Do they go off the beaten track? Or, for example, it could be as simple as a longer average stay of a length of stay per traveler, so that you know that they can actually contribute to tourism. But I also agree. I think what Tina said is that we have to keep the existing KPIs to ensure that it's still an economy. So we have to also think about that. But I think it's a really great addition to also look into, what do residents feel, and what are travelers doing?
Very few populations, no matter what hemisphere they're in, very few local host communities use or understand or have heard of the word regenerative, no matter where you are. It's a term that's being used by those who are not on the ground. And I don't believe it's just a shift in term. I think communities instinctively speak the language of regeneration without any intellectualizing of that. They say what they regard as thriving for their place. The challenge is we're not asking places, what do you regard as success here? In some of my projects, I get to do that, and in some I don't. And I don't do the ones anymore where somebody at least hasn't asked that question. What does thriving look like here? Because that is the first question. Local people will say, like my example yesterday, it's members in my sports club. So that's not fancy language. That's just the best possible indicator you're going to get for their vitality. So if we're going to ask that question, we're going to get regenerative outcomes. The problem is we're starting with how do we get more visitors here? So we're in a numbers debate from the beginning. And even with certifications saying, let's ask the residents, let's number jobs, let's do all of that. They're outside metrics by outside people, and they're all economic. There's none that are actually about the heart and soul of the place and the people. And it's only in recent years you wouldn't be regarded as crazy for even suggesting that. But we are actually in rooms now where people speak about what it feels to be there and how to measure that, what they want to pass on for future generations, what they value about having received. And I think those things are not unmeasurable, and they're also not buzzwords. And different places, another place will not say members in their sports club. They'll say, we don't want our stories to die. So it's really quite different, and it has to emerge from the place, no matter what you call that. We have to start with locals naming their own success version and then asking, can tourism help us achieve it? Tourism may not even be the solution, so we're several steps ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Tina. We have some inputs from Catherine Gallagher.
Like, who's actually measuring this anyway? And how can we, going back to the first point around telling stories, how can we tell more stories? And do we need metrics or do we need stories? Can stories replace metrics?
Anne, would you like to get this question?
Oh, I just think that I think both are equally important. I don't think we can rely on numbers only because you need the stories, you need the actual context, but we also need to have transparency. We need to be able to show evidence of that this is actually the case. I think we need, and I think that's also with the Consumer Protection Act, the Green Claims Directive, it's all about actually proving that you are creating positive impact. And I think we shouldn't stick to the numbers only. It's not just proving whatever you do. Stories are really important, but it should definitely be a combination. So I think I would say equally important.
Thank you, Anne. And we're going on to the second question for the segment. Are governments prepared to implement bold measures for true sustainable growth? And what do you see on your side?
I think destinations want to, but I do think it's a slow movement. I do think most destinations are still focused on arrival numbers and really focused on getting as many people in destination. And I also feel that they define success like that. So I think it should be like a whole mindset shift, that they realize that too many travelers are actually ruining a certain image or actually the destination itself. And I do think there are destinations that are moving in the right direction. So they're implementing zoning, protected area management, but it does require political, how to say that, courage. And I do think a lot of destinations are not fully ready to do that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I do at the same time have quite a lot of empathy for governments, ministers, DMOs in the current situation. Given that I feel that we're in a new era of tourism, where tourism is navigating towards something that is going to be more positive and contributory. I think the demand is coming from society for that. And if I was in charge of a DMO right now, I am expected to deliver numbers, marketing campaigns, GDP, but I'm also expected to deliver community vitality, ecological value, collaboration, all this stuff that maybe I never was an expert in. And now I'm at the top of the pile and I'm now charged with doing this. And the challenge is that the expectations of what tourism should deliver have changed, but the metrics haven't caught up yet. And a lot of policies are 5 years old. They're 5-year cycles which is ridiculous anyway to measure place in 5-year cycles, but that policies change slowly. And until a policy changes, those senior people are bound by what's in their policy. So if we look at what's changed from 2021 to 2026, we were in COVID in 2021. AI has happened in the meantime. The wars have happened. And that policy hasn't changed. But tourism has changed massively. So I do have a large amount. I think there's a lot of courageous people. I think there's a lot of frustrated people at the head of these. And I think it's quite a challenge to turn that ship when policy changes so slowly. I think it's a tough one. I think there's willingness, and also because tourism isn't a standalone industry, it's connected to so much else. A lot of government departments need to change, not just a tourism department, for example, and to do that in tandem. So it's very complex. Yeah.
Thank you, Tina. We have an input from Jennine Cohen, co-founder of Women Travel Leaders.
So this is not a topic related specifically to women travel leaders or women in travel, but travel at large. So I'm calling in from Baja California Sur in Mexico, and it's an interesting case study with what's happening here with regards to marine conservation. And this question of politics and metrics, it's beyond at just kind of the DMO level or the national level, because you have many of these, many countries, most countries around the world are large, they're nuanced, and there are, a variety of destinations within a country. So take, Mexico as an example. So it's such an incredibly complex ecosystem of politics that are happening, layered on, not to mention in places like Latin America, corruption, political interest, etc. So you've got basically people at the, we've been talking about metrics and this kind of obsession with metrics and reporting, and also several people mentioned kind of people coming from the outside and what is the measure of success in these small communities. And yet, I've been living this life here around for the last 6 years in Baja California Sur, in a small fishing village in Mexico, where you've got people in politics at the national level in Mexico City who are like completely disconnected from what's happening in the small fishing village, trying to make a policy that works for a tiny village, where the tiny village has its own ecosystem of hierarchy and motivation and economic interests and personalities and marine life. It's so incredibly complicated. And I think sometimes if we're talking about at a super zoomed out level, we often forget about what several people mentioned of what's really happening on the ground, and how is that in the country kind of connected and creating a system that literally cannot keep up with the rate of change that's happening around the world to do what's required because of this web of complexity that's happening. So, and I don't think it's necessarily a unique story to Mexico, but I think it's one that is worth noting when we're kind of talking from a more academic perspective or a global perspective, to really remember the complexity of what's happening at the national level versus the regional level as well.
Thank you, Jennine. And we have Sonia back on the segment. Over to you.
I think that, so that's the reason why I'm here, right? From my perspective, again, living in Madagascar and even in Nosy Be, in the most touristic place of Madagascar, the government is not prepared for not even really for tourism, and because they are mostly chasing money and chasing, investors from anywhere. And so unfortunately, there are not any zoning. There are protected zones like national parks. That's true, because the biodiversity in Madagascar is the most precious treasure we have. But beside those national parks, they are not. Tourism can happen anywhere, almost anywhere, and very often they without considering communities. If a place is nice and an investor wants it, he can take it. That's what we experienced here last year. Here in the place I'm living, very close. So from my perspective, in this type of context, governments are not inclined to curb tourist arrivals or to reduce foreign exchange earnings, to protect any particular area. So unfortunately, but as a biodiversity hotspot, our international visitors expect. They expect well-protected and regulated sites. So that is the compromise. That is the difficulty for a tour operator or any touristic stakeholder to satisfy that side and to make, proper marketing as well, to sell. You see my beautiful baobab forest behind me. We have these iconic trees. People want to see them. So I try to sell this place. It's very difficult to go there, and it's not protected. So from time to time, it's completely burnt down. But these trees survive to fire because they are full with storing water. So that is the reality on the field sometimes.
Thank you, Tina, Sonia, and Anne for contributing to the regenerative tourism segment of the Roundtable. We are now on the third segment of the conversation, where we're going to explore community and support with leading speakers Sarah Payne, the Director of Impact of Untours Foundation, Jennine Cohen, and Catherine Gallagher, the founders of Women Travel Leaders. So we start with the first question for this segment, and we look into what are the leadership capabilities that you foresee as a non-negotiable in a tourism and travel industry today that is increasingly shaped by automation and data intelligence. So we start with Catherine.
Yeah, I'm going to start with a question actually to everyone on the call to put in the chat, Dolores, if you don't mind, but on the word leadership, have a think about someone that's inspired you in a leadership role, and think about the words that you would use to describe them, and pop them in the chat. Compassionate, listening, present, empathetic, supportive, collaborative, kind, confident, friendly. And so innovative, empathetic, good communicator. So yeah, I basically absolutely see that community and leadership in person is absolutely non-negotiable. If that answers, so that's answers that question.
I want to piggyback on what Catherine's saying here, and what I think what she's getting at is in a time of AI and in a time of metrics and reporting, we talk a lot about things like regenerative tourism. Someone said here it was just kind of a repackaging of what we're already doing. And that thing that we're doing of those people, if you look at, well, who is it in my life that I'm really inspired by? Who do I really admire? And it's most often the people really who are doing it from the heart. So I mention the heart because this is actually a panel on female leadership, and all of us on this planet have an opportunity and a responsibility to connect with our hearts. And we as women are the stewards of this beautiful planet. That's one of our responsibilities, I believe, to bring beauty into the world. And maybe that sounds a little old school, but beauty is also in part of honoring what is already there and supporting it and loving it and letting whatever we do as leaders come from the heart. Now, that may sound a little spiritual, woo-woo out there, whatever you want to call it, but it's really just talking about, we could say the same thing in terms of purpose-led, right? I mean, that is a more kind of business-friendly way to say it. But when we're in our heads and we're thinking maybe a little bit too much on and out of balance and in the masculine, in black and white, this or that, this worked, this didn't, it was good, it was bad, we're not really seeing the big picture in terms of the ecosystem, of the general support of ecosystems or social systems. And that's where women are just biologically wired differently. We're always seeing the community. We're always thinking in subtleties. We don't see things hierarchically. We don't see things in terms of a linear path or of I'm the leader, you're the follower. We're all co-creating this together. So if it's a co-creation, how do we really want to show up? How do we want to feel in our body? How do we want to feel about the way that we're connecting with others, about the way that we're showing up in this world? Because we're all going back to the earth eventually anyway. So if that's where we're going, why not really keep it close to the ground and connected with the planet and with each other? So that's what we really strive to create at Women Travel Leaders. It's really not about ego. It's not about reporting, and it's not about being in your head or having anything to prove. It's about, how am I showing up in community? Because AI is working for us, not the other way around. So how can we leverage that to really lean in and do this thing together? That's the idea.
Beautifully put, Jennine. And Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off that. I think we've all talked about the limitations of AI, in terms of getting that like local texture and real feel. And I have a lot of personal thoughts about AI, but as you were just mentioning, Jennine, it's a tool, and it's a tool that has to be used by humans that still have this leadership set that includes these soft skills that in my mind are irreplaceable. That is qualitatively different than when you have a human being making decisions than AI. And so I think that's part of the key here is how are leaders, human leaders, going to continue to make decisions and use this as a tool? AI can help us gather a lot of data all in one place and very quickly, more efficiently than I could, but someone still needs to be able to sift through all of that data, know the conditions on the ground, have personal relationships with people they trust that can tell you about the situation on the ground so that you can make the right decisions and have that ethical framework to do that. And so I think, again, we have to focus on this as a tool and even go beyond, thinking about data driven to maybe it's just data informed, right? Like we need to keep humans at the forefront of this, talking about the industry, because humans are the backbone of this industry and of this world. But like we can't forget that. We have to keep that in the forefront of our mind. And again, just to reiterate, it's a tool. It can't replace human leadership. And I love what you said too about feminine leadership, and the ability to see these nuances. As we've mentioned, this is a very complex world. There are a lot of dominoes that need to fall in order to have the right things happen in destinations. And again, that requires like a brain that thinks in these webs and intricacies and knows the trade-offs and can balance all of that. And that's just not replaceable by technology, I hope, and I believe.
And now to the second question of the segment. How should we redefine success across travel and tourism entrepreneurs beyond revenue, and what metrics should replace the most traditional KPIs? Here, Jennine, over to you.
I'm really keen to jump in on this one, Dolores. So you mentioned the word perform, and again, that comes from a place of here, of the head. It's from an external kind of motivation. And really it comes back to here. What is this thing? How do I feel when I'm doing this thing? Do I feel expansive? Do the people that I'm connecting with, do they feel joyful? It's all about, success. Is it metrics or is it the feeling? Feeling is not it's not data. It's debated. You could say, yeah, we could measure the feeling. Of course, we can measure feelings, but it's not something. It's not really about math, right? It's can I learn? That's another form of being expansive. Can I feel equal parts energized and motivated and excited about this? And how does it move the needle forward in a way that feels easeful for me, right? Because we know that when we're surrounded by the right people and we're in the right places in the right moment, that things it's almost that I can just relax into this in my knowing that I'm on the right path. When things start to really feel tenuous and we feel like we're a fish swimming upstream and we feel like we're pushing that boulder uphill, whether it's, we feel like we're starting to work against instead of together in collaboration, whether it be with tourism boards or DMOs or other, competitors, which we don't really believe in women travel leaders, we know that we're not really coming from a place of flow. We're not really on the path where we're meant to be. And that's the grace. That's the grace as the feminine of coming into that place of just being able to step back and coming in gently. And that's where the real power is. And when we're able to shift that mindset together as a collective, the power is in the ease. It doesn't always have to be so hard.
I think we need to move away from this obsession with growth and growth for growth's sake. And if I think about most of the members in our community, most of them are small business owners. They truly care about what they do. They want to have an impact. And it's not about, how much they're not trying to build things for shareholder profits. And, yes, they need to make money. And that's really, really important. And you can have some, your even more positive impact through that. But I'd really love, and this is where community comes in as well, for us to be collectively thriving together. It's much better for each one of us as well as the environment, the land, the people, the places that we're talking about. I think we need to collectively move towards balance and thriving together and away from growth for growth's sake.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Catherine, with what you're saying. Even as an impactor investor in this space, like growth for growth's sake is not what we're looking for. And I don't really like to talk about even scale that often. I just want to add here, I think like there's one KPI that is very important to elevate. And on our most recent impact survey of all of our portfolio companies, we included this question is, what was your percentage of local spending in destinations? And do you formally track that? Because I think that, again, tourism, and if you're an entrepreneur of a tourism business, you depend on the health of that destination or destinations for your business. So from a business case, that destination has to be thriving. From a moral case, of course, that has to be there because we are visiting these communities. I was at a recent gathering at CREST, the Center for Responsible Tourism, and it just kind of occurred to me. I was like, we're not talking about tourism, we're talking about community development here. And so we really need to focus the well-being of these communities and how much not you're spending even nationally in the country or regionally, but how much is going back to even drivers that are from those specific communities where you're visiting. Where is your food coming from that you're giving to your guests? And so I think like we really need to, if we're talking about KPIs, this is one that I really want to see elevated, because as we've said throughout this call so far, it is about local agency. It is about these communities deciding what kind of tourism they want for themselves. Do they want you to visit their communities? How do they want you to visit their communities? If we are not doing that, we are practicing colonialism. And so I think if we're thinking about KPIs, I really want to elevate that one. And because it's a good, all of these other ones that we've mentioned are important, and especially ones that Tina shared in the chat. So check those out. But yeah, I think it's a really good proxy for, are you thinking in the right way? Are you really committed to seeing these destinations be better off? If we're talking about regenerative travel, that is what it means. Did you leave it better off? And how are you going to measure that? And it's a really good way to look at that.
And the last question to the segment: how can the power of global networks create a systematic change rather than isolated success stories? Over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, I think for us, our big thing is the power of SMEs, along with the rest of the impact businesses. But 80% of this industry is small to medium-sized enterprises, and so our intervention is specifically capital, as well as one-on-one support with these businesses to help them grow in the ways that they want to, and the ways that destinations want to grow. And so I think part of our role is bringing visibility to that, to these smaller actors who are absolutely doing the right things, whether they call it regenerative or not. If they're doing it, we should be talking about it. We should be holding them up. And so I think there's power in aggregating that. Our Reset Tourism Fund portfolio is over 50 businesses strong. And so we get to talk about that as a collective and the impact across the portfolio, and drive that attention back to the practitioners that are doing this well and that we need to see replicated across the world in different contexts. I'll leave it there because I'm curious for Catherine to jump in as well.
I completely agree with everything you said. The power of small, to sum it up. And I put in the chat a quote by Margaret Mead, which is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So I think you know where I'm going with that, but it's like power to the people, to these small businesses, and to these amazing women, so many of us that are on this call today.
Thank you for this beautiful conversation on the third segment. And now the last segment of the Roundtable, dedicated to innovation and inclusion, with leading speakers Iris Serbonescu, the founder of Women's Work, Vanessa Karell, the founder of Greether, and Catarina Varau, the founder of Unique Stays in Portugal. So the first questions for the speaker is, if tourism was redesigned today as a community-first tool to develop, what structural change would you implement immediately? Hello, Catarina, and over to you.
Hello, everyone. So lucky to be here, and I feel thrilled to be with so many brilliant minds, and a lot has been said about this subject. And if I may start, if you excuse me, I think the communities are the center of everything, and as you've been said today, we have the responsibility to showcase what is the value of what locals are doing, because we are as companies that implement and settle. For instance, I'm thinking about, you are an hotel, you're opening your hotel in a certain place. You have the responsibility to showcase the artisans, not just exploit them or use them for what it takes. And communities are economic actors. They're not just cultural ornaments. They are not just cultural ornaments. So they are people. They have their value. They have their own identity, ownership. And this is not something that you steal or use as a marketing and put it as a storytelling. They have their own story, their own identity, the ownership of the story is what we are using as the value of the destination in the first place. So let's respect that and honor that with that projection and giving back, learning and teaching, and to create this win-win situation. It's not just they are the value of the place, not just ornaments, as I was saying. So it's important to restore dignity, not just greenwashing what we are doing, restoring dignity, giving back. Giving back means being will to understand what they are afraid to show, what they want to preserve, and how much tourism do they want. Involve them in this conversation, not just doing the colonialism thing as we were talking about. That this is a brilliant phrase. But it's just, if we are not giving back, what are we doing? So are we just using it as a brand? And this has huge impact, because the future of tourism is not just being smarter or using this technology that I'm completely skeptical right now. It's being more human. Let's go back to being human. It's mandatory to go back to being human, and be clever and bright, understanding that this economic value goes for all of us, not just the companies that are starting somewhere in the destination.
Thank you, Katharina. And now we hear it from Vanessa. Hello, Vanessa. Over to you.
Hi, good morning. Great to have my first morning coffee with you all. Greetings from San Francisco. And in fears of sounding repetitive to Katharina, I think the first thing I would change is local value creation, right? I think making the locals the heroes. Earlier, Carmen Roberts mentioned what's happening in Japan, with the Kyoto Cherry Festival being canceled. That's something that was traditional and generational, and that's being affected because of, mass tourism. And then we had Sonia also mention, how in developing countries things are completely different to like traveling to, like a country like Sri Lanka versus going to Norway. So there is a lot of things that technology is helping solve how we can impact the locals. In just a few years with Greether, we have seen growth. And Dolores, I remember from our conversation talking about how it had been so hard for us to find women in countries like Sri Lanka or Brunei. And now with technology, I've seen the change in just a couple of years. But it takes a lot of paying attention to where you should also be driving the tourism, right? And then we are a part of the Untours Foundation portfolio company. And like Sarah Payne mentioned earlier, it's super important to us that we are focusing on how we are making a positive impact with our company. And, my dream when I started Greether was to be able to travel wherever I wanted to with peace of mind as a woman. But that equally impacted women, and because what I wanted to do was connect with local women, and they are the champions. They are the women who are making us successful and like be something in the world. And so for us, we're not just tracking the satisfaction of our travelers, we're also tracking our local women guides satisfaction. We listen to their feedback, what they have to say. Are we providing them with fair wages? Are we keeping them safe? Are they happy with the services that are offering them? And most importantly, as Katharina was mentioning earlier, I think they're not moving pieces, right? They are the forefront of, our experiences. They're the champions. They're not a moving piece. And we allow them the freedom that they are able to choose what they want to show to their travelers. So whenever a traveler comes to us, they tell us what they're interested in doing. But the local woman is the one who decides what they're going to be doing. And that is putting the power back to them instead of us telling them, here's an agenda that is not authentic, And I think for many of us who are today here, that we have had the privilege of traveling we remember the valuable moments we had with locals more than the hotel or the taxi ride or the airplane. We remember those moments of magic that happens when you meet a local person and you have those cool memories of, that you bring back home to your friends. I was recently traveling through Bosnia, and while visiting Mostar, I usually like to read a book about the place I'm traveling to learn about it. But then I met a wonderful local young woman who then told me from her perspective what her family suffered through the war. That is forever going to be with me. And that really changed the way now I think about the people in Bosnia, right? And so I think that bringing back the essence of traveling, which is putting it back to the culture that we're experiencing, that is like a privilege to be there. That's what I would change. Sorry if I went too long, but I think I wanted to mention that is really important for all of us to know.
Wonderful, Vanessa. Thank you so much for your input. And now it's over to Iris.
Welcome and hi everyone from Oaxaca, Mexico. I have just loved hearing how much we're all on the same page about what needs to happen next in tourism. One of the part of this question around structural change, like what structural change would we implement immediately around community tourism? What came to mind for me, based on living in Spain for 2 years, but being from Toronto, Canada, was this idea of third spaces. So as we know, first space is our home, second space is our work, and then the third space is very prevalent in Europe. It becomes this informal gathering space where community comes to life. And I really noticed that in the town squares and in the community centers. It's just such a more vibrant experience outside of my hometown of Toronto, which is probably because it snows and no one leaves their house for 6 months of the year. But examples of third spaces are like cafes, community centers, parks, markets, libraries. And I feel like when third spaces are protected, tourism can really thrive. But when they're ignored, tourism becomes extractive. So if we only interact with the commercial layer of a destination, that's when tourism becomes extractive. If we can support the social fabric of third spaces, that's when tourism becomes a tool for creating more community and participating in the community in that local spot.
Because I think the subject is that most of the time, when companies are challenged to look into subjects as communities and inclusion, we are not talking about becoming a good person. We are not talking about the moral obligation here, nor charity. We are talking about what is the value of that place. And that place has value considering the locals, the people that actually live there, that hone their identity, because we tourism are using this to brand, to sell, and all that. So it's a balance between being happy where you live as a local and respecting the amount of growth that we want in tourism. Not who owns anything to say how much tourism capacity does a place has rather than the locals. Who has a word on that rather than the locals? Come on. I am the one saying it. Okay, I might be, as a local, not enlightened or know everything that can happen good in my place. For instance, I'm from the Azores. Azores has been considered one of the green destinations. They do not recycle. So it's a contradiction. So it's a green destination as a tourism destination, but I'm a local. I know I'm from the Azores. They do not recycle. So we need to teach and expose people to their vulnerabilities and what do they do not know already or should learn. But this doesn't give you room to just step in and let me grow tourism wherever it takes. So it should be a balance. What can we teach? What can we learn? What should we preserve? What should we highlight? And it's not about just charity and becoming, I don't know, owning the place. It's how big, instead of thinking, how big can we grow, the question should be, how deep can we connect?
So when we get to that deep connection point. My last question for the segment is, when is cultural heritage strengthened rather than commodified? Vanessa, your inputs.
That has been something that we have been thinking a lot about, because for us as leaders, we have to be really mindful of the marketing we're doing, of the media we're putting out, the areas we're promoting. But we have a lot of challenges as us traveling, like with travel companies. One of them is people keep going to the places they keep going to, and it's hard to reroute them to the places that need the tourism, right? So for us, we are looking at the metrics where like places like every year, where are travelers going to, or where are the places that are upcoming. And we're trying to also always be mindful of like, where should we try to push more, like marketing towards. And so something that we're currently doing that's not necessarily being done by traditional tours. And I mentioned earlier, the women are the ones who they decide to share their own culture. So for example, we have travelers next week in Morocco, and it's Ramadan. And so the ladies weren't available until a certain time. And so we had to accommodate around that. And, like for us, like you could say we're a business, we need to make money, but at the same time, we have to respect the culture. And this is something that, if you're traveling during Ramadan, and as a traveler, a responsible traveler, you should know that you should be expecting a little different or experience that is equally beautiful and culturally enriching. But the exciting part that we have seen is that travelers they are looking for ways to really experience realness of culture. Now, the hard part is that these products are hard to find. People keep going to the Via tours of the world, and they keep getting the same cookie cutter experiences. So we are trying to change that, with our services as much as we can. Obviously, we're still a small company, but I think that the great part here, the opportunity for all of us, is that travelers are looking for the authentic and experiences that really are celebrating culture, and not the cookie cutter ones, that copy paste Instagram photos. They really are trying to go to the destinations that provide them that culture, that story that they will bring back home. And as we've said it again and again, local people control the stories, but also the leaders. So we are trying to work more with tourism destinations. We, for example, just did our launch of our female travel certificate for destinations, in which we teach them where the gaps are for female travelers visiting their area, and ways to improve the destination for these type of travelers. Because I don't think, all of us here today are leaders, right, in a way. But we need to also motivate the leaders above us, right? And I think it comes from who is making the decisions. As we are saying, there's a lot of places where locals can't access the beaches because there is resorts. And that was one of the thing that we found out through the first certification we did in Tulum. We surveyed the local women there and got their complaints and then filtered them to them back. And it was like, we can't access our own beaches. How can I recommend it to travelers if we can't even go ourselves? Because they charge us $100 for 2 beers just to be in front of the beach. So, there's still a lot of things that need to be changed up front, like on the top. But it's going to take a lot of effort collectively from all of us.
And lastly, some inputs from you, Iris.
Vanessa is the queen of community here and cultural heritage with what she does. So I just want to piggyback off what she shared around who can say no. That's one of the main factors of decision-making power lying with the locals, and keeping that preserving culture and keeping it in local hands is who's allowed to say no to what they're asked to do. That's a huge indicator of whether or not this is true community-based tourism, and whether it actually preserves the local culture or it's extractive tourism. So I really love that. And I think just recognizing that we need different metrics, as I think Tina shared, like success isn't about visitor numbers. It isn't about necessarily the traditional KPIs. But if we look at success as community satisfaction and cultural pride and youth engagement and all of these different metrics, and expand how we measure it that way, then we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you so much for joining this very special episode of Truth Behind Travel podcast, an episode dedicated to the recording of Women Leading the Way, the Global Travel and Tourism Roundtable hosted in collaboration with the Institute of Tourism, online, live, where more than 700 people were connected to listen to the topics, the value, the insights shared by the speakers of the roundtable. All the speakers of the roundtable were speakers on the podcast on season 4. Carmen Roberts, Tina O'Dwyer, Vanessa Karell, Jong, Sarah Payne, Lola Akinmade, Jennine Cohen and Catherine Gallagher, Iris Serbonescu, Katerina Varau, and Sonia Gotelbe. You can find all their episodes and their respective conversations on the podcast, and I encourage you to deepen the conversation with them directly. Each of these 4 tracks today explored some of the topics that are very relevant to today's conversation in travel and tourism, but also I feel it only just scratched the surface of a much deeper conversation, and I'm very grateful for all the speakers to take the time to join the roundtable and share their wisdom, experience, and knowledge. Thank you once again, and I'll see you soon on the podcast for the next episode.